Education. I'm here today with Linda Drake, SBE's Director of Career and College Readiness Initiatives. We are connecting today from the ancestral and unceded traditional lands of 29 federally recognized tribes and numerous other Native American tribes that have not received federal recognition. We give thanks to the Native American tribes who are the original and current stewards of this land and to the land itself. We acknowledge that peoples native to this land have not been well served by our educational system, and we ask that you join us in our commitment to recognizing the important history of Native peoples in our state and in honoring Washington's tribes as one step towards dismantling the colonialism present in our education system. I am joining you today from the traditional lands of the Nisqually and Coast Salish peoples. There is a resource on screen to discover which traditional tribal lands your home and work occupies. And if you're willing, feel free to share what traditional lands you're joining from in the chat. So today we are in webinar format since we have so many participants, but we still want to know who's who in the room. So please share in chat your name and location, and if appropriate, your organization. We are also about to launch a poll to better understand roles of folks in the room. So in this poll, you should be able to check all that apply. So if you're both a parent and an educator, please check both. Stephanie, could you go ahead and launch that poll for me? All right, while folks are answering, I did just want to share a quick overview of our time together today. Linda and I are going to be giving about a 15-minute overview of background information to inform our discussion. Then the rest of our time together will be around some guiding discussion questions where folks are going to be able to engage in two different ways. Because we have so many folks in the webinar Zoom room, we wanted to give a couple ways. So number one, you're going to be able to add your thoughts to an online platform called Padlet, which we'll share more about once we get to that point. And then we'll also invite some of you, those we have time for, to share your thoughts verbally at certain points. You'll be able to raise your hand, and then we'll be able to give you permission to unmute and speak at the appropriate time.
And I'll just add that we are recording this, but I do know that we do want frank opinions, and I know some folks might be more comfortable if they're anonymous. We also have a survey. We'll be sharing a survey link. That survey is anonymous. And also when we do get to the Padlet part, you can enter those anonymously, but if you also have a Padlet account, it'll show up as your name. So if you really want to be anonymous, probably the survey is the best way to share frank thoughts.
All right, so I think we've given folks enough time to respond to the poll if we want to go ahead and end that and share the results. It looks like we have a lot of educators with us, which is wonderful. And we also have a good number of family members with us of current or recent K-12 students. And of course, we also have some, community organization partners, agency partners, some higher ed folks. That's great. All right. I'm going to go ahead and move on. So by way of background, the state's mastery-based learning work group was charged by the legislature to develop a profile of a graduate describing the cross-disciplinary skills a student needs to develop by the time they graduate high school to be successful in their next steps in life, whatever those might be. The profile of a graduate is a way of enabling our educators to focus on all of the important skills in the classroom we want our students to learn beyond just the academic content, like critical thinking and problem solving and financial and digital literacy, just to name a few. The profile will set the vision for what we require of all students, and it's a way to redefine more holistic graduation requirements based on what students need to know and be able to do for future success. So the development of these skills is of course a lifelong process, and the K-12 system focus is simply to support students in developing age-appropriate foundational skills which better prepare them for whatever path they choose after high school. So House Bill 1599 from a couple of years ago charged the state board with doing research around our graduation pathway options, specifically if changes needed to be made to existing pathways, if additional graduation pathway options were needed, and whether all students have equitable access to all of the graduation pathways. And then last year, in the same bill that charged the state work group to develop a profile of a graduate, the legislature also charged the State Board of Education with doing a holistic examination of our graduation requirements and authorized the state board to submit recommendations to the legislature to align graduation requirements with the profile of a graduate by December of this year. So in developing these recommendations, the state board is required to consider the relationship between credits and core subject area requirements, potential changes to the requirements, and how the components of the high school diploma can better work together as a system. So the state board began our process of reviewing current graduation requirements back in January. Based on the profile of a graduate and engagements with students, educators, partner organizations, and the public, we began identifying draft topics for recommendations. Some of you may even have engaged with us in some of our spring listening sessions about this work or in other meetings throughout this year. From July to October, we have begun and will continue developing and refining draft recommendations and engaging with members of the public around these recommendations. Then our last couple of months of this year, we will finalize our recommendations and our report will be submitted to the legislature at the end of the year. So today we are here to talk about aligning graduation requirements to the profile of a graduate. I will note that if sort of related but tangential topics get brought up, we may need to redirect comments because there are a lot of other organizations and work groups who are doing work in related areas in our state. But as far as further ways to engage, we were going to continue having partner organization events and meetings for further discussion. We have a survey available now that Linda mentioned. That's Stephanie, if you could post that link in chat, I would sure appreciate it. So please do feel free to take the survey because I'm sure we won't have a chance, unfortunately, to hear from all of you today, but we really would love to hear all of your thoughts on our various topics we'll be sharing about here in a few minutes. And then I also want to recognize that some of you on the call have also probably been involved in our work over the past 3 years on graduation pathways. So continue to appreciate folks who continue to engage with us. And please do feel free to email us any additional comments or request a meeting to have further discussion if that's helpful as well. So with that, I am going to pass it over to Linda.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. And I know you probably can't see how many participants we have, but we have about 140 on the line. So we really appreciate that you all showed up. And this does have to be in a format where we can't hear from many people individually, but we do hope to have ways that you can engage with us. And we're always willing to engage and speak one-on-one or visit any organization meetings that you have as well to share about this work. This is an image that was developed at our listening sessions in the spring, and we asked what 3 words describe current graduations and what 3 words would you hope to describe graduation requirements in the future. And this was very consistent across about 3 different listening sessions that folks believe that the current graduation requirements are complicated, confusing, and challenging, and that the aspirational hope for the future is that graduation requirements can become more flexible, relevant, and clear. So I think that's an ongoing challenge for the board in helping to communicate about graduation requirements, just as it is an ongoing challenge for the system. But that's something to keep in mind as we try and work at making recommendations to improve our graduation requirements. Next slide, please. I do want to mention some ongoing work of the board. We see this as part of the work of aligning graduation requirements to the profile of the graduate, but we're working on in a different way. So the board, if you are familiar with the work of the board's been working on expanding mastery-based learning for several years now. The board is going to do a budget request to the legislature to continue that work. To support a mastery-based grant program, as well as support strategies and development of resources that should allow increasing capacity for districts to offer mastery-based learning and provide students with more individualized learning. Next slide. And then one of the large areas of the work is is to develop a request legislation for this coming session. We think that we are going to recommend clarifications to the purpose of graduation pathways, as well as add a performance-based pathway and a work-based pathway. So those things the board are working on. We will want to get engagement with the public on that, but that's sort of in a different time frame and a different format and way of interacting with the public. So if you are interested in this work, you'll want to keep up on the legislature. If there is a bill developed by request legislation developed by the board, we'll be communicating about that and come the fall and come the next legislative session, and you'll want to keep track of the development of that bill. But for now, next slide. We're going to go in, I'm going to talk about the recommendations that we want to get your engagement on today. And as we said, this is in response to trying to align graduation requirements with the profile of the graduate. So next slide. One of the things that people said is that they felt as though master's life skills, and next slide, if you could just click through these pretty quickly. These are the areas where most folks, in particular, and students in particular, and parents in particular, felt that financial literacy was missing from our current graduation requirements. Many educators and a lot of students felt as though cultural competency and embracing differences in diversity was missing from current graduation requirements. Many students and educators and parents felt that sustaining wellness is missing from current graduation requirements. I think in particular, in light of the challenges of the last few years of COVID, their concerns about mental health came to the fore, and students in particular wanted more mental health learning in their graduation requirements. And then finally, cultivates personal growth and knowledge, and applied learning has come up as well. Next slide. All right, this is where we'd like to have you, if you can, log on to Padlet. The next 3 slides will be our specific recommendations where we want to get your feedback. And those slides are also the same text is reproduced in Padlet. So Padlet will give us a way for you to give us feedback. And if for some reason you're not able to access Padlet, we'll also be going over those recommendations in our PowerPoint. And so then you can also use the comments if you can't access Padlet. Let's see. Let's make sure that you all can get that access. And we're putting that Padlet link into chat. All right. Maybe by a show of hands, we can see how many folks have been able to connect with Padlet successfully. Okay, it does seem like a fair number of you have been able to do that. Thank you. Okay, good. I see a fair number of hands. I know this can be a challenge. If you're working on a computer, you might have to have 2 windows open. If you're on a phone, it might be super challenging. But as I said, the text in Padlet is the same as the text that will be in the PowerPoint that we show. So you can put comments either in the chat of the Zoom, or you can put comments in Padlet. All right, just a reminder, the link to Padlet is in the comments, so we will move on to the next slide, please. All right, so in Padlet, you're able to rate your level of supports from 1 to 5 stars for each of the recommendations. So please do that if you're inclined. And also, we want to ask you what you think of the recommendations. Do you have concerns? And what would make the recommendation successful? So I'm going to go through each of these in turn. The recommendations are organized by the area of the profile. So next slide. These recommendations show up in the first 2 columns of the Padlet. The first recommendation has to do around financial education. As I mentioned, many students and parents felt as though there wasn't sufficient financial education in the graduation requirement structure. So our recommendation is to support the work of the Financial Education Public-Private Partnership and to build capacity for districts to offer high-quality financial education to all students. So that is the recommendation that is in the first column of the Padlet. So if you have comments or would like to rate that recommendation, that would be great. Thank you. And then the next column is about sustaining wellness. And our recommendations are to create more flexibility in physical education and health to allow for mental health content. This would probably involve a review of the learning standards for physical education and health, which could be a multi-year process, but the board could consider shifting the graduation requirement credits between physical education and health, making them more flexible and allow districts to have more flexibility in how they include mental health in their physical education and health curricula. The other recommendation is to develop a state policy for the waiver or excusal of physical education so that it is more uniform around the state. We heard from quite a few parents and students that they had a frustration because one school would allow participation in an extracurricular sport to count towards the fitness requirement, and other districts didn't, other schools didn't. It might vary from school to school within a district. And I think there is an opportunity there to create greater uniformity in that area. So in this first area of draft recommendations, financial education and health and physical education, I want to invite some verbal comments if folks want to unmute, and you could also turn on your video if you'd like. We'd like to set aside the next 5 minutes or so to invite folks to share some actual comments in person. If you'd like to do that, please raise your hand. Okay, it looks like we have one raised hand. I'm sorry, that's a little hard for me to follow. 2 raised hands. It looks like Loretta, can you go ahead and share?
Yeah, I think I hear from a lot of people about the need for financial literacy. And I think it would be great to have that kind of thing as an elective to make it available. But I don't think everything has to become a graduation requirement.
Thank you. I mean, I think that it's true that many schools do have it as an elective already. And in fact, I believe there is a requirement that schools are going to need to provide the opportunity for students to have access to financial education. I think it is good feedback to hear from you. I think the board is interested in incorporating it somehow, not necessarily as a required course, but perhaps embedding it in a required course or embedding it in the high school and beyond plan, which the board would like to see more uniformly presented as an advisory or a class for which students earn credit. So that is that is our thinking, and the board may be advocating that or creating models of how the high school and beyond plan could be improved and more financial education could be included in that.
Can I speak again?
Sure, follow up.
That would be a good idea. We watched our kids closely go through that high school and beyond plan. And for the most part, it was kind of fairly useless. And I think the fact that they moved it up to 8th grade, I don't think was a great idea. I don't think 8th graders can think about doing resumes or have anything to put on a resume. But I think training them more on financial literacy would be more important than the stuff they're asking them to do now.
Okay. All right, thank you, Loretta. It looks like Betty is next. Betty, can you share?
Well, financial literacy, I believe, is really important. I've also seen some of the curriculum. I disagree with what is in part of the curriculum. So I always have a problem when it looks so good, and I have found out it's not as good as it looks.
All right, thank you. So we want high quality financial education curriculum. So
Not just high quality, but stay on financial. Don't add a whole bunch of other pieces to it as well that are unrelated.
okay, thank you. Nicholas.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I think obviously I work at a school district. I think financial literacy has a place in school districts. My comment was specific to the mental health aspect of physical education, which I would support. What I would be anxious about in this context of schools is the capacities of schools to having the people who are trained and comfortable of going down that road once it becomes available, because health is fairly limited in the aspects of its right now and sits in physical education. And if we get into the deeper parts of mental health, I think there's a capacity issue that needs to be addressed. We're struggling to teach SEL because it's so outside of what teachers teach or are trained to teach. And then this would be a deeper dive around that. Again, I support the concept and think it's a good thing to add to the system, but I don't know if the system is ready to take that on. So if the board does go that way, then there needs to be some coordination with schools and legislatures about the expectations of who's responsible and how that would look to be implemented. Because if it isn't done that way, it's going to sort of fall flat and either disappear or cause a lot of anxiety or distrust. So, but yes, both of those are very important.
Thank you. That's a good consideration to have. Thanks. All right. Any additional comments from Ryan?
Yeah, I'm not necessarily sure if you've heard of the Mockingbird Society, but they have a bill proposal for START, which is Student to Adulthood Readiness Training. And basically the goal is to create like a financial literacy course, but it's more like a life skills course to be required by all schools in Washington State. It's like a life skills course to prepare for adulthood after high school. This also will prevent homelessness in youth. It's like the course would range from different things from financial literacy to basic mechanics and cooking, and then first aid and bloodborne pathogen training. Like, so this is just like a question that is always asked all the time is like, what do you actually use today that you learned in high school, right? And almost everybody will tell you literally nothing, right? And so START is a proposed course to kind of do all of this kind of stuff.
Thank you. All right, I think we will move on to the next group of recommendations. Thank you for sharing. Those of you who put comments online or in the chat, and those of you who spoke up, thank you very much. Okay, next slide. Okay, these are our draft recommendations around embracing differences and diversity. And they are in the third column on the Padlet. First recommendation is to ensure districts implement the since time immemorial curriculum. This is a curriculum that is a required curriculum about tribal sovereignty in Washington State. The next recommendation is for ethnic studies to partner with advocates to build coalition about implementing ethnic studies. There has been work that has been done in this area. OSPI has a framework for ethnic studies that the board does support. The board is the ultimate goal of the board. We have a board resolution to include ethnic studies in graduation requirements within the current framework of graduation requirements. So not necessarily creating a new ethnic studies course that all students must take, but embedding ethnic studies in required courses. The next recommendation is to support English language learners in meeting graduation requirements by allowing English language learners to meet world language graduation requirements when taking an English language arts course. So if they are a non-English speaker, when they take an English course, that can count both as an English course and as a world language course for them. And in addition, we want to increase opportunities for students to earn the seal of biliteracy by promoting adoption of district policies for accepting the seal of biliteracy and implementing the seal of biliteracy, and ensure that English language learners are evaluated for earning the seal of biliteracy. So I will, let's see, I'd like to encourage you to enter comments into Padlet, and then also we'll take the next, I think 5 to 10 minutes, inviting folks to raise their hand, and we can unmute you and give some comment. Oh yes, just another word about the Since Time Immemorial curriculum. That is a required curriculum. There is some flexibility in districts' timeline in implementing that. And what the board would like to do is, what the board is considering doing is setting a timeline or a deadline by which districts must implement the Since Time Immemorial. It has been a required curriculum for several years already. But there is some flexibility about when districts actually implement the timeline, and it does require districts to develop a relationship with the local tribes. So that may also be a constraining factor in that. All right, so does anybody would like to, looks like we do have some raised hands. I think Stephanie is probably working on, all right, Lynn, can you go ahead?
Yes, thank you so much for the opportunity to learn about the recommendations. And thank you again for all of your work to both of you. I am really glad to hear that there is the implementation of the Since Time Immemorial curriculum, and that there is a goal to partner with advocates to build coalition on the implementation of ethnic studies, which is something we have been really strongly recommending as a coalition. And I would like to just kind of know a little bit more, if you don't mind, about what kind of current implementation, for the Since Time Immemorial curriculum, and in what steps you plan on working and partnering with any advocates and different organizations to build the coalition, but also help build the curriculum on ethnic studies.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that I'd like to invite Alyssa to jump in here. I think she's more knowledgeable about ethnic studies than I am. I do know that it's not at this stage a curriculum. I don't know that it will be a curriculum. I think it'll be a framework of learning standards that will be incorporated into other courses. So there may be courses in ethnic studies. They would most likely be offered as electives But then we also want ethnic studies learning standards to be incorporated into other courses. Alyssa, do you want to add anything to this?
I'll add just a little bit, but then Lynn, I know we've chatted before, so feel free to reach out to me. I'm always happy to chat more offline, just since I know we have limited time here today. But Linda's exactly right. As you may know, OSPI developed some resources around ethnic studies, but it's not a curriculum, since in Washington, curriculum is adopted at the local level, not at the state level. So I know OSPI's ethnic studies work group has done some great work in cultivating some resources. And then I think the state board's recommendation is just to continue work in this area. We know there's a lot more work that needs to happen, and we know it's going to take a lot of time. So just continuing to sort of work with partners, just like you, Lynn, who I know has a real passion in this area, to continue to advance this work. So hopefully that's a helpful first response, and then happy to chat more offline.
May I offer a little follow-up there, Lisa? I actually have been trying to reach you, but for some reason, the email I have for you is not working. So I keep getting, returns. So I do like to see if we can get in touch again.
Oh,
That
sure.
would be great.
I'll send you my email, Lynn, right now.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you.
Mhm.
And I just wanted to also follow up to kind of ask what is the plan as far as, how you will be working on partnering with different organizations on the implementation of ethnic studies. Because from what I heard from Linda, there is not going to be a separate curriculum, but trying to include that into the current social studies, maybe histories, curriculums. So I just wonder if there is more information we will be able to get for that particular topic. Thank you.
And I would say that, that we're at still a pretty much beginning stage to this. And the board is interested in this. The board wants to pursue making sure that ethnic studies is included in our graduation requirements, but OSPI has also taken the lead on this. We need to make sure that we're working with them. And I know that there are many groups around the state that are really interested in this and passionately engaged in this, and we want to make sure that we hear from everybody. I don't know that I can really tell you details of a plan of how we would build coalition on this, but it's just something we want to make sure that is our recommendation, and that state continues to move forward on this.
I would also just note that to really build a coalition, it can't just be State Board of Education involved in this work, right? We need OSPI, who sets learning standards. We need the Professional Educator Standards Board around teacher training. So really the State Board's recommendation, just like Linda said, is very preliminary and is hopefully a first step in continuing to sort of build some capacity with partners to move the work forward. And yes, of course, I'm seeing in chat someone's noting that we need WASDA. For those of you who don't know, that's the Washington State School Directors Association, and you're exactly right. We would not be super effective in moving this work forward without WASDA and WASA and some of our other state level associations.
All right, and also I see a note in chat from Shira. You're right, the curriculum can be both state, the state legislature can do anything, and if they wish to mandate a curriculum, they can. In general, curriculums are decided at this local level by districts, but on occasion, the state legislature mandates a curriculum, which is what they did in the cases since time immemorial. All right, do we have the next person lined up who'd like to speak?
Looks like Juliet.
Yeah, hi, thank you. So this is directed towards ethnic studies and building a coalition on the implementation. There are certainly a lot of organizations that are very supportive of the current direction that the State Board and OSPI are taking with ethnic studies. But there are also a lot of parents and a lot of organizations that have concerns about the liberated or critical framework that OSPI has developed and the direction that State Board of Education is continuing with that liberated framework. And I'm wondering whether OSPI and the State Board will work to include in that coalition those who might want to pursue ethnic studies in a more, in a less liberatory or critical fashion, more under a multicultural education, and address some of those concerns within that coalition that have been brought up to both OSPI and State Board of Education at previous discussions about ethnic studies.
You know, I think that we are really mandated by our process to listen to everybody. So yes, I think that we will need to listen to those voices. I don't know what final decision will be made, but yes, we must listen to those voices for sure.
Well, the question was not so much listening to the voices, but actually actively including them in this coalition that you're building.
You know, and I'd have to say that it's still at a beginning stage.
The other thing I would add is oftentimes the legislature dictates who sits on work groups like OSPI's Ethnic Studies Advisory Committee. So I think some of that is just is dictated by the legislature. But we appreciate you raising the concern, Juliet.
Let's see, do we have Michelle?
Hi, this is Michelle Antilaoki. I'm the former World Languages Program Supervisor from OSPI and implemented actually the World Language Competency-Based Credit Testing, and then which led to the Seal of Biliteracy in our state.
Yeah, it's good to hear from you, Michelle.
Nice to see you guys. Yeah, the third bullet point, the supporting English language learners to get world language graduation requirements when taking an English language course. I don't think it makes sense because world language credits are not really a requirement for high school graduation. That's really an option. And chances are, if they are English language learners in high school, they have other usable language that they could be tested in. And so they should be getting recognition for that home language. And so that's through the competency-based credit testing and potentially the seal of biliteracy. So I think it's, if it were the case that a person couldn't graduate high school without those world language credits, I suppose that is a point. But since the main purpose of the credits is for college admissions, the colleges certainly aren't going to accept credits called world languages that are for English, high school English classes.
Yeah, I agree that these students need to, most effective would be for them to take the seal of biliteracy and be recognized in that way. And you're correct that world languages are not core requirements, they are electives. But if they are getting recognized for world languages for their English language learning, it would allow them to free up time in their schedule. So it would give them more flexibility in their schedule. I think that's.
But that's what they could do with the testing for the world language competency-based credit testing. It doesn't have, they can earn from 1 to 4 credits. So it's not even the 4 that's required for the state seal. We've been doing hundreds, thousands of students have been tested like this throughout the state in the last 10 years. So I think the main thing is that a lot of schools and districts haven't really been paying attention to that opportunity, which goes to the 4th bullet around getting more visibility for the seal of biliteracy.
Okay, that's a good point. So what you're saying is the seal of biliteracy and credits through competency learning would be preferable over just awarding them.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. If there are children who honestly don't have another language that they could test in, I think most of the times we're talking about children entering at kindergarten or first grade who are qualified for English learner services, but actually are English speakers at home. They just don't qualify at the level of English that is expected by the schools at that point. But anybody who is still an English learner by high school is probably a more recent immigrant.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I think we probably only have time for maybe 1 or 2 more comments. Do we have, let's see, Elizabeth?
Oh, Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. I had a question about, I work in the high school and we have a lot of students coming in, that are immigrants. And a lot of them are already coming with skills. And I was just wondering, is there anything out there, like we have like the skill centers and things for students like from 11th and 12th grade to earn credit and get certified. But is there anything that's like helping them get credit to graduate?
I think that this might be, tell me if I'm wrong. It sounds like they could be earning credit through mastery-based learning, but the
Yeah, or
district would have to have those in place. They'd have to have policies in place and procedures for recognizing credits.
yeah, yeah, like say somebody comes already and they've already been like working on trucks and working this or that, and then they can go to like the skill center and actually get certified and get their credits, and then, I don't know. So that would be through the school district then?
Yes, I think the school district has the authority to set up policies that would allow that to happen.
Yeah.
I
So
think
with
that the mastery-based work that Alyssa is doing, we're hoping to have that provide resources so the districts understand better how to do that.
yeah, I was wondering how that translation piece goes with the skill centers, so I'm a little curious about that. But,
I mean, the skill centers, because it is career and technical education, there are some limitations on how mastery-based crediting can work because the program of CTE has its own requirements, such as, it's a lot of hands-on work. It's a lot of, work with a teacher that needs to be endorsed in CTE.
would the para-educator be anything in there that they could use to bridge the gap?
A paraeducator could help support the student, but I don't know that it would, you don't have CTE paraeducators as far as I know. You'd need to have an instructor endorsed in CTE involved in some way in order for students to get CTE credit.
Okay.
But, but I think that you could work with CTE departments and districts to see if there are ways that the student could, work with a CTE to get some of those skills recognized and maybe shorten the path to earning a credential or a certificate.
Or kind of like bridge the gap in between, be like the middleman or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, okay, thanks.
All right, thanks. I think looking at the time, we should probably move on to the next slide. But thank you all, and I'm sorry we can't get to all of the folks that would like to make comments. All right, so draft recommendations concerning cultivating personal knowledge and growth. This is a little bit of a catch-all. These are different topics, but one of the things that the board is very interested in and will be a recommendation is that there be a greater focus on learning standards rather than seat time to support mastery-based learning and interdisciplinary learning. So that's a recommendation that is pretty directly tied to mastery-based learning so that students progress at their own pace through mastery of learning standards and that recognition of their work isn't necessarily through time alone. The next recommendation is to improve the high school transcript to better support mastery-based learning and multidisciplinary learning and include greater detail on how graduation requirements are met. And finally, a recommendation to improve the high school and beyond plan through state support for a limited number of online platforms. This would help improve uniformity and portability so that students could transfer between districts and carry their high school plan and beyond plan with them. We've also for several years now been hoping to make the high school and beyond plan more relevant and useful for the student even after they graduate and allow allow it to be useful in higher education and training. So that is in our in the fourth column in our Padlet. And would anyone like to give some verbal comments about these? Okay, looks like we've got a few hands. Let's see, is Carol available yet to speak? Go ahead, Carol.
Hello, thank you for the opportunity. I will say that I am a firm believer that we should focus on learning standards rather than seek time. And I say this because we have different students coming from different backgrounds with different experiences and exposure. And I think we're positioned just right to be able to assess what they're bringing to the table to begin with, provide the necessary supports for them to get to what the end outcomes of what we want them to know and be able to do, and allow them to move forward as needed to the next grade level content or move deeper. So I do firmly believe that we should support mastery-based learning rather than seek time.
Thank you, Carol. Let's see. We have Nicholas.
Yeah, mine is just an improving the high school and beyond plan. I think it's a great tool. It could be a great resource for the school districts. It's very vague to school districts who's responsible for this and how it is to be used and timeline wise. And you see that in special ed where it's being passed off to special ed teachers. You have some places a building counselor does it, other places a secretary, there's no clarity from the high school and beyond plan about how it is to look and who is responsible for it in the schools. And that breeds inequity in the school systems when there's lack of direction for initiatives like this. And I'm a huge advocate for the high school beyond plan. I think it's a great tool, but the implementation of this has been really weak, partially because it's unclear what the expectation is and who's responsible for it. I know it's extremely difficult to even get data on how many are done, when they're done, are they adjusted, how many times? So school systems are getting no feedback on that data regardless when we have other systems that in fact do report back to the system. And actually, the only accountability to the high school beyond plan was through the recent legislation that forces special ed teachers to assure that the transition plans are aligned to the high school and beyond plan, which then the high school beyond plan can be changed the next day by the student and or parent or counselor. So we've actually added expectations to special ed teachers around non-special ed things when the general ed side of the building is not actually implementing the high school and beyond plan because it's unclear how to do that or what the expectations are. And it's causing animosity between peers. It's causing conflict in schools, and it's causing students not to have a point person who's in charge. And so, again, I think the high school and beyond plan is a fantastic tool. We just need explicit instructions on how that is to operate in schools and who is responsible for that tool to be done. And data needs to be provided back to schools so they can see how it's being used. Thank you.
Thank you. Good comments. I think we'll hear from David. Go ahead, David.
Hi there. Thanks, David Beard from Schools at Washington. I would agree the high school and beyond plan is a great concept and could be a great tool. So I'm excited to see the uniformity and portability of it. And as a part of that portability piece is making sure that other community partners can access the High School and Beyond plan. So to make sure that it's virtual and that there are avenues for them to tie into that, because a lot of the beauty, particularly for younger youth, like middle school youth, is the career exploration and is tracking what they're doing outside of the school building and outside of the classroom that may be contributing to their pathways out, once they're post-secondary. So I think, one recommendation to add to this, not a requirement, but a recommendation, is that community partners access it and be able to support the work of the High School and Beyond plan. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I think we need to move on to our final general questions. So next slide, thank you. These are the general questions that we have for you. Do you have suggestions for additional topics? Are there other aspects of the current graduation requirements that you would want to change? And is the board on the right track? So these are all in the Padlet on the final column. And if anyone would like to speak to these general topics, I'd like to invite you to raise your hand.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Nicholas, go ahead. And you've given us several things to think about, so you can kick off this section as well.
Thank you so much. No, my last piece of advocacy is the having a certificate for students with disabilities who have cognitive impairments, who none of the current pathways to graduation really make sense because their life paths are so drastically different than the rest of the students in the school. I've heard for a number of special ed directors and special ed teachers across the state that we are forcing them into the CTE pathway because they have no options for a certificate of completion, which many, I think approximately 25 or 27 states in the country have for students with these unique needs and unique life paths. And in the process, we forcing them into one of our standardized graduation pathways, they don't get the life skills training they need to be independent contributors to society. And we run the risk of making them draws on the society versus contributors because of the arbitrary nature of some of these pathways for these individualized students. And I'm talking about a population that's probably only about 5 to 8% of the student population in the state. And in many states, there's clear criteria within the evaluation process who identifies these students and puts them on this pathway toward a certificate of completion. So I just want to reiterate that the state really needs to look hard at a certificate of completion pathway for cognitively impaired students in this state. Thank you.
Thank you. Carol, would you like to go ahead?
Yes, I would like to see some type of incentives or some movement towards mandating that districts allow their 11th and 12th graders who are, I would say, at least at grade level, get experiences in the local community in terms of pre-apprenticeships, internships, job shadows. Sometimes in the K-12 system, although well-intended, I think we tend to forget the handoff, the ultimate reason why we're preparing kids to mingle and be successful in the real world, that we need to mingle outside of the schoolhouse more with the colleges and community-based organizations and industry folks to make sure that our kids are ready for that, for the high demand that's in some of the industries like maritime and space and aerospace and manufacturing, as well as are ready for our colleges. So I think there should be some more focus in that area. I think there's a large gap and we have many jobs available for students, but they're not quite ready for them. And for the most part, many have been told to just go to college, when in fact they can go into a vocational training, and that include college as well. So that's something I think we should try and incentivize in the K-12 system.
Thank you, Carol. Let's see, Loretta?
Yeah, so this is the first time I've been on one of these calls, and it was interesting to me to see the very first part, which was the profile of our students. And I'm not sure how this educational system actually comes up with that. and whether it's really aligned with what parents are hoping for, because a lot of parents think they focus on those issues. I'm just kind of concerned that, you know, most of our students or half of our students are not even reading, writing, and doing math at grade level. And instead of focusing on how to improve that situation, you're just coming up with more things to sort of embed. My understanding was the primary point of this discussion was ethnic studies. And then you also talked about how it's not going to be a separate curriculum. It's going to be embedded, and embedding something, one, takes a lot more work by the individual teachers. It also can drive up the cost of curriculum if you're actually looking for American history with some ethnic studies embedded into it. I just feel like you're making things more and more complicated, and we still don't have kids that can read and write.
Yeah, thank you. And, you know, I think that I think the board would say that it's not one or the other. I think the board would feel as though working on the attributes of the profile of the graduate would only help learning. And that's our hope. That's our aspirational hope. But we appreciate your thoughts.
I would just jump in to say that there's actually research that supports what Linda just said, that working on these interdisciplinary skills actually leads to higher academic attainment. And I can also put some information in chat about how the profile was developed, but actually quite a few parents were involved in the development of that as well.
All right, Jim.
Yes, I would just like to add that not losing track of our students that are on the rural areas that are on the margins. I would submit that because they do not have the same opportunities of students that are alert near the more urban areas along I-5, bigger cities. There's always a transportation issue, getting to skill centers and so forth. And so it speaks to an equity issue for those students. And if you can just always kind of keep a lens on those challenges, it'd be most appreciated. But thank you for this work and this listening session. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we only have a couple more minutes, so I think we need to go on to the next slide. We here on staff can stay a few minutes longer if anyone wants to talk to us one-on-one, but we do want to respect your time. So let's move on to the final slide, where we wanted to share with you how to continue to engage in this work. We will have additional listening sessions. We would encourage you to contact us if you have an organizational meeting or event where you would like board staff or maybe even board members to come participate with you and talk about this work and get your feedback on these recommendations. And finally, there is the alignment survey again. And we would encourage you to take the alignment survey. We'd really appreciate all the comments that you've shared with us in chat and verbally and in the Padlet. Thank you very much for that. And you're always welcome to contact me as well at linda.drake at k12.wa.us if you felt like you didn't, you have other ideas and other comments you'd like to make. So I think with that, we can wrap up the webinar. But as I said, I think Alyssa and I can stay on for a few more minutes if there are folks that want to share. But thank you all very much for being here. All right, looks like David. Go ahead, David. David, are you, you can unmute.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I didn't notice. I just wanted to comment on this ethnic studies thing because it feels like there's a little bit of deflection going on regarding the concerns that people are raising about liberated ethnic studies. It's not that preliminary. The ethnic studies framework has been out for over a year. The only people that seem to be in touch with the State Board of Education and PESB about it are those people who are very much involved in the liberated form of ethnic studies. There's a pre-proposal already for a specialty endorsement, which would essentially basically establish it as the preferred way to teach ethnic studies. And it's a deep concern. It's not just something that the right-wing conservatives are concerned about. It's just whether or not this really makes sense for K through 12 public education. And as a final point, Alyssa, you can make the point about there's research that supports it, but basically this is an ideology, and the people who are supporting it are not arguing it on the basis of student performance. They're arguing on the basis of changing social outcomes. And I just don't think that's what K through 12 education is about.
Linda, do you want me to do a couple of points of clarification? Is that helpful?
Sure.
Thanks, David. First of all, I would just say OSPI's Ethnic Studies Advisory Committee developed the Ethnic Studies framework, not State Board. So any concerns about that would need to be directed back to that committee, because that's not a space where we have authority. Second, the research I was referencing was not specific to ethnic studies. I'm sorry if I made it sound like it was. I was referencing research that shows that teaching interdisciplinary skills like communication, collaboration, those types of things lead to higher academic outcomes. But appreciate you sharing those thoughts.
Right. Shira, are you able to unmute? Go ahead.
Oh, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for staying on. You know, I want to echo what others are saying, but also, you know, it's concerning to me that the way that no state agency is really standing up and taking responsibility for its role in pushing this radical political agenda forward. Alyssa, it's true that the OSPI was charged by the legislature to create the framework, but if the State Board of Education makes that framework a high school graduation requirement, that is on the State Board of Education. And it's not okay to say, well, that's up to the district and that's up to the OSPI. And it's like, you guys have a limited amount of time and resources, and you're choosing to focus a lot of attention on making sure that every student in Washington state gets indoctrinated by what you know to be a radical critical studies based explicitly like neo-Marxist based. We've been through the OSPI's framework. It's very radical in terms of the people there that are being approved for clock hours, the resources that they're providing. It's not balanced, it's not diverse, it doesn't align with multiculturalism. It is a radical, narrow political ideology. And you guys are getting lots of continued feedback from the public that and from students that they don't want this, that they're drowning in the existing requirements. The OSPI state report card shows the majority of our students don't meet the existing standard. They're not ready to get, you know, the most basic employment in our society. They can't balance their checkbook. They can't read above, you know, they can't read at a high school level. And so to be adding to their load a course or embedding into every course this radical, narrow political ideology is something the State Board of Ed is doing. And that's why the State Board of Ed is getting the feedback that it's getting. We want lots of students at your listening session in May, over 40 comments. I think 100% of the public comments at your meeting a month ago are telling you that the public of Washington does not want this. So I just want to again echo what others are saying in this meeting to say, let's slow this down. Let's make sure that before we make a graduation requirement, it's something that aligns with the RCWs that require teachers to teach patriotic education. Let's make sure it's historically accurate. Let's make sure that that in promoting diversity, we're actually promoting diversity. Like Juliet said, is there a diversity of opinions on the committees, et cetera? You know, let's get a diverse group of clock hours providers and of ethnic studies accredited providers that can teach, you know, there's different versions of ethnic studies. We don't have to adopt the liberated radical one. So I guess that's what I would say. And in terms of the research, why are we talking about research on interdisciplinary skills when the topic is ethnic studies? What?
I'm sorry, I think that there is a misunderstanding about the purpose of this listening session. The purpose of this listening session and how the board and how we tried to advertise it was for feedback on the recommendations to align graduation requirements with the profile of the graduate. And ethnic studies is part of that, and we do appreciate your views on ethnic studies, but I do want to correct a misinterpretation that some folks seem to have, that this listening session was about ethnic studies alone, and it was not.
Oh, I hear that. That's what I'm here to discuss, because it's the part that's concerning to me. So thank you for listening, and we appreciate all the opportunities that you're giving the public for feedback.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think, let's see, let's listen to 3 more people and then we'll call it a day. We'll listen to Gloria or Tom. Tom, go ahead, Tom. Go ahead, Tom, you need to unmute if you haven't yet. Tom, are you there? Go ahead. Okay, I don't hear from you, Tom. Maybe, are you there?
Hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Are you there? Can you hear me? Oh, thank you so much. Thanks so much for the process. I'm very much impressed. I've spoken with Alyssa before, and I just really appreciate the great work that you're doing. I just wanted to add a couple. One was a question. Do you know whether the time memorial curriculum does much with the discovery doctrine? Either of you, does that ring a bell?
I don't know.
Okay, well, I can follow up with that. I teach community college as an adjunct. I'm an old retired guy, but I still teach. And so I have the Running Start students coming through, and I have some perspective on what our graduates are learning and not learning. But I just run in recently in some work I'm doing with our church in trying to do more with land acknowledgements about just how insidious the discovery doctrine has been through our courts, our jurisprudence. And so I can contact OSPI and just be sure, because I haven't seen that. It's basically what it is, whichever European government put a stake in the ground, that meant that they discovered the land. And the popes in the 14th and 15th century said that all people should be treated as slaves. It's a pretty bad doctrine that our Supreme Court early in the 19th century wedded itself with. And anyway, it's just an important thing, I think, for all of our students to learn about. So I just wanted to comment on that. And then Alyssa and I have talked, you've given me an opportunity, and I really appreciate it, to speak about civic learning. And I'm wondering whether the Civic Learning Council has been in touch with you folks about civic learning at all. Have you heard from them? You know, the reason is I'm concerned since January 6th that we've been, that we really need to emphasize civic learning, both through service learning, project-based learning, and consider increasing the graduation requirement for civics. I know it's blended now, it's a half a credit and can be done through interdisciplinary ways, but I really wonder whether we should give that, the state board should give that some more serious thought because of what our country is going through currently.
Right, and also, Tom, I think a couple years ago, actually, you know, it's being phased in that civics must be taught as a standalone course. So with the graduating class, I think of 2024, they must learn civics in a standalone half credit course.
Okay, and the question might be whether that's enough.
Right.
For our state, right?
Right.
Well, thank you so much. I will continue to add my voice, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll hear from Gloria and then Betty, and then we'll call it a day. But go ahead, Gloria.
All right. There we go. All right. Well, I just wanted to, I know we're wrapping up, but I did want to say when the conversation around ethnic studies and that even though some families and students may not show up to voice their support of the work around ethnic studies, I think there's a belief by many families that we're moving ahead into the state. So I think it is concerning that we hear the words radical, ideological, indoctrinated, and those three terms, because I think when some people ask and say that they want multiculturalism, which isn't a bad thing, that also for some families and students and people of color and even people that aren't those of color, that multiculturalism in our country has equaled the idea of a melting pot, that we sometimes lose our own identities to become one. And I think considering that this country was stolen from indigenous people and worked by enslaved stolen people, that we shouldn't necessarily move towards a melting pot, but more like a salad bowl kind of concept, that we all maintain our identities, especially considering how this country came to be. So I do want to think about that our students necessarily aren't where we want them to be, but that's not because of any type of indoctrination, or that when I think about the idea of being invisible, being disenfranchised, and we've taken a colorblind approach to education, those are in consideration as a formal doctorate student and have a doctorate, that I have studied these things too, and I've seen it in real life, that the reason our students, some of our students are in the situation that they're in is that the educational system has not worked for them. And so we should think differently about that, and our students have been unseen. So it is great for everyone to have an educational system that works for them. So I just wanted to put that into the space.
Thank you. All right, Betty, go ahead.
So my perspective on education is a lot different than some. I graduated in 1977, and I think the educational system has been going in the wrong direction for a long time. It needs to be more about reading, writing, and arithmetic, and less about politics. We are so far behind the world in our students being able to meet the educational requirements. And I don't think adding more stuff is going to help.
Okay, thank you. All right, I think we'll wrap it up there. And I want to appreciate anyone who's still on and been listening, and encourage you to take the survey and remain engaged in this work. Thank you very much.